I'm going to tell you a bit about me, my book, and what I've learned along the way. And then I really value our chance to have a conversation and to hear a bit more from you and learn. You know, I love to respond to what's of interest to you. As David says, I've had a lengthy career in the NHS in the main. And then third sector. I guess if you scratch the surface, I'd still tend to think of myself as a nurse. And my daughter's just about to complete her nurse training, so I've had lots of nursey chat recently, which I've quite enjoyed. I was always taught to challenge, and I guess that's kind of what I brought in to my career. Nowadays, my leadership role is probably negotiating the various myself as leader with my own condition. You know, I've worked at a level of executive director as a leader, but it's probably my most challenging role is the one I've got now, which is negotiating that whole world of who I am, and then working with health and social care teams in and having my needs met, and challenging those on behalf of others. So just to let you know, I was approaching, I've had breast cancer now 5 times in my life, and that the first time was in my 30s. And it shocks me to say that, but it is actually true. Once, just to roll back a wee bit, it's when I was working as a practice nurse, and probably it was being on both sides of that fence of healthcare and being a receiver of health that took me to work in third sector. I really wanted to see how I could influence change for good by being in a different role. So initially I went to work in the in diabetes because I'd worked a lot as a practice nurse in diabetes. And I was the national director for Diabetes UK and Scotland. But while I was working there, that was when I helped set up the Health and Social Care Alliance, which is an umbrella alliance of people from across the different health charities. And we had a lot in common. So we wanted to use our collective voice to influence for change, particularly with the government. And then the opportunity came up for me to work as a director of a breast cancer charity, not only to do that, but to set it up in Scotland. And I've learned about myself that I love setting things up. I love having a fresh challenge. And so off I went. I was living in the west of Scotland. The job was in Edinburgh. I was commuting every day. It was a crazy decision in lots of ways, but I just had to do it. It had my name on it and I loved it. Set up a super team and we were really pretty successful in what we did. And 2 years in, I was about to go to a meeting, which was due to start 10 o'clock. And I realised that I had an appointment that morning, 8:30 at the breast clinic, follow-up thing, nothing to worry about. Said to my colleagues who were all breast cancer specialists in Scotland, said to them, look, I might be a bit late, explained to one what was going on. And then, of course, things changed. And what was to be a routine appointment then became, in fact, my second diagnosis with breast cancer. By the time my biopsy got to the lab, I discovered that the person in the lab had had 3 phone calls asking them to do it quickly for me. So I had some allies in the camp that I didn't even know about after having had to tell them at the meeting why I didn't turn up. So that started me on a different journey. And I was holding the space between a director of a charity and someone experiencing it. So what I decided to do was start a blog, and you can see my blog. You'll find it anywhere, just audreyburt.blogspot.com. I've got an unusual name, so it tends to pop up. I started it then, and it takes you through that whole story, so I'm not going to do that. but it reminded me that I loved to write. And it's, you know, something I'd let go in school, as so many of us do, of our things that we love to do. And so I started enjoying doing that. After a couple of years trying to reconcile working in breast cancer and living with it, I decided to leave. And partly I was just exhausted, and set up as a coach. And so another bit of my journey continued. Um, I'm not going to go into that because it's going to take too much time. I don't want to take too much time. But basically, more diagnosis of breast cancer and coincidentally losing my mobility due to a benign growth of my spine. And it, you know, it's one of these things you cannot, when you're living it, I think, oh, it can't be that as well. It just can't be. But it was. And I realise now that's what happens to people. None of us have a pass that says that won't happen to me. So I become a wheelchair user. I'm living that life as a disabled person, negotiating social care, social support and healthcare as well. So I have the works. And may I tell you that it's not perfect, but in the main, the care and support I get is excellent. And I really feel it's important for me to say that when we hear so much about the difficulties that all of you have in your working life. So I thank everyone from the bottom of my heart for excellent care in the hardest of circumstance. But what it led me to was when we came up to the lockdown, and like everyone else, you know, I was still working part-time as a coach and consultant, and I could just see my things being cancelled, you know, that month where everything went out the diary. And I thought, oh, right, okay. And my second thought was, right, I can write my book now. And it came out of nowhere, really. And initially I thought, well, would I tell my story? Because my story is, you know, it's kind of unusual. And I've got lots of wee tales. But what I had an energy to do was actually to tell the story of what I've learned along the way. And, you know, what I've found when I wanted more information about something that was all written from the point of view of healthcare in the main. So I was learning about a medical model and concept of health and well-being. And actually, whilst that was important, and I was fortunate to have good health literacy, and so many don't, but I needed something else. I needed to know how this worked in my life. I needed to know how, you know, could I keep doing the things I wanted to do? Where could I get support? Who's been through this too? Because some of what I've had is quite rare. You know, I have the BRCA gene, and the only other person I really knew much about was Angelina Jolie, and sadly, I don't think we've got a whole lot in common. So, you know, that wasn't going to help me. So all of these things, that's where I thought, I don't see that this kind of resource exists. And I spoke to lots of people who were in the field of self-management and in third sector, who were, you know, working in the specialist nurses or OTs in the field, and it didn't feel like there was that. So I thought, well, okay, let's give it a go. Now, in things that I'd done in life, I realised that people like lists. I do myself, it helps hang my hat on something. And also, until I came up with what I've described as the 10 elements, and this is my book, you've had a description through email of what the 10 elements are. But it's the 10 elements to living well with serious illness and long-term conditions. And until I came up with them, it was a bit like a bowl of spaghetti. There was loads of things interconnecting, but I couldn't quite describe them until I put them down in this way. So this is what got this spaghetti unscrambled in my head. Hopefully it works for other people. Lots of people said it has, but others would have different, would they put them in a different order, although they're not especially in an order of preference. And they'd say, well, I'd leave that one, but I'd put this one in. That's fine. I don't sell this as the only way it can be. It was what worked for me, which was the only thing I could do. And just before I go on to the 10 elements, the title is The Journey to Better Times. Now, none of you are probably as old as me, so I may have to explain this offline somewhere, but I'm a Leonard Cohen fan, and he's got this amazing song called, I think it's called The Anthem. There's a line in it that says, there's a crack in everything. It's how the light gets in. And I wanted to call it that, but then somebody pointed out I'd have to pay him, or in fact his legacy now, a lot of money to do that. So I decided that wasn't going to be an option, and came up with The Journey to Better Times. And that came out of a story of 30 years ago almost, when I went back to work as a practice nurse after having had treatment for breast cancer. And also 2 weeks after my treatment finished, my father died of prostate cancer. And so each had made the other worse. It was a terribly challenging time. My kids were at school, I was working part-time, and I was also studying a master's in public health, as I would, just because I didn't have enough to do. So I went back to work, and one of the GPs said to me, "How are you doing?" And I don't think I could even answer. I was just not able to find the words. And he said to me, "There'll be better times." And, even still, when I repeat those words, I get a lump in my throat, because he was right. And at that time, I didn't believe that. I didn't believe there would be better times. But he was right. And each time I've been up and down that roller coaster, there have been better times. And some of them, it's really been quite hard to believe that. So the 10 elements, a quick romp through, and all the details in the book, and there's references to things where there's a bit of background to it. But it is, in the main, this is my story, and I tell the elements through my own story to explain to you why I came to that. So, there's no right or wrong, or it's just my own story. I'm going to put this back on the list. Where on my iPad? Oh, yeah. So number 1 is know who you are. And, that's might sound like a kind of strange thing to say. Of course, I know who I am. But do I know who I am? I mean, at stages of my life, I've been a mum, and that's kind of dominated it. I've been someone who we still call as patients. I've been a patient, and that's dominated it. And who I am is the mix of all of that. But largely it's about what created me in the first place. And, how do I know who I am? And the important ways to try and find that out over the years is to try and build my awareness. Now, going through the 10 elements helps to fill that picture in, but ask yourself, who am I, and what is it that I see as important in life? Not just who am I in this moment as a manager, a lecturer, a patient, a client, whatever. Number 2 is about understanding your values. And, as a coach, that's something I always encourage people to do. And I think it's a Gandhi quote. These are all in the book. I'm not very good at learning them precisely, but the Gandhi quote is along the lines of, if you live what you say and what you do, then that's the way happiness lies. And if you think about it, how often are we challenged in our lives when we're not doing that? When we're not living our values, and how hard that can be, whether it's in our working life, or maybe as parents, or maybe as children, as all in all the roles we have. So what are your values? What are the main things that matter to you? And they do tend to change over a lifetime. They're not fixed. There's a lot of different ways there's exercises to do it. I really encourage you to do that. What are your strengths is number 3. And, we're really good at, particularly in this culture of knowing what we're not good at. I can always list you 5 things that I haven't done well today. But I would struggle to tell you what I did do. And that's kind of, been a bit of my story. And I know it is for a lot of us. And sometimes if we're in a working situation, or if we're unwell, if we don't know what our strengths are, how do we find the resources and the resilience to deal with it? So my colleague I've worked with many things, Dr. David Riley, if he's worked with people for a while, he knows when he'll say, how are you not dead yet? Because they've gone through all sorts in their lives, and here they are. And he's good at reminding me of that when I'm like feeling on my knees with something, reminding me what I have done, what I have achieved, what I have coped with health-wise, and reminding me and how to bring them into my day-to-day vision of myself, but also reminding me what they are. The next one, find out who and what lifts you up and brings you joy, is hugely important. Now, I was just meeting a dog earlier, and very much was what brings the person joy in their everyday. Yesterday, I was being filmed for a BBC Disclosure series, and my cat decided that he had to play a big part in this filming. So he was posing. He's definitely some of what brings me joy, and he's realised in recent times that I need it, because my dog died a year ago, and suddenly the cat's become a lap cat. So he knows what brings me joy. But I've learned over the years, there have been some people who haven't brought me joy, and some things that haven't, whether they've been jobs, whether they've been people I've worked with, whether they've been so-called friends who haven't actually proven that we're friends at all. And what I've had to do is learn to know the difference, and to know what to let go of, and know what to invest in, because energy is a huge issue for someone going through a long-term illness, and several if you're like me. And you want to put your energy into people and things that bring you joy. That way your energy increases exponentially, and you'll achieve great things, whatever you want them to be, whether it's making the dinner that night, or whether it's it's putting something like this together. Working with your health and social care team as a partner in care, hugely important. And we speak about partnership, and are we really looking at partnership? Are we as patients just wanting somebody to make their mind up for us and tell us what to do, because that was easier in those days when that happened? Or are we as professionals still wanting to keep control because we can't really trust anyone else to know what to do? How could we? We've always had to hold their hand for it or whatever. So being a partner in care is owning your responsibility in that, whatever your role is in it, as a carer, informal or formal, as a person going through something, as a health or social care professional, all of these situations. If you're a partner, what do you have to take up and what do you have to let go of. And also learning, one of the things I often use for people, and it's in the book, are the realistic medicine questions that were developed. And whilst I wouldn't have called them that, I wouldn't have called it realistic medicine, I think the questions are hugely useful. I'm not going to read them out here because it would take too long, but they're in the book and maybe somebody could put them in the chat. Learning and getting support from people with lived experience. Now, I started by talking about that. Hugely, hugely important. It's been life-saving for me when I've had someone who has been able to say, yeah, I felt that way too, it's not just you. Or maybe have you thought about, or just to be willing to hear my story and not be horrified by it. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, people have strange reactions to, if you tell them you've got stage 4 cancer, then that can trigger other people hugely. The other thing I find triggers people is when I say I'm a wheelchair user, as if that's something terrible, whereas my wheelchair has been my saviour in the last few years. It stopped me trying to get about in pain all the time. And I love being in my mobility scooter. You know, it gives me a freedom that I don't get in any other way. So don't pity me. You know, just think, God, I wish I could have a go in that. Every child wants a go on the scooter, but it's the adults who layer their concerns on it. Nearly there. Learn to process what has happened. So don't just think by going through it and getting out the other side, that's over. As we know with so many things, we now know about trauma-informed issues that people live with. A lot of people will go through trauma that perhaps we haven't thought of, and certainly not thought of ourselves. Take time to process and take opportunities to process. Understand grief and loss. And in the book I've got and challenge the myth of closure. Grief and loss, it's not about closure. It's about going round and up and down, and it's that spaghetti of grief and loss. It changes, but it doesn't disappear, and it isn't closed. And, you know, let's not think people are somehow ill if they still feel that grief in later years. 9 is nature, nurture, and food matters. You know, we cannot pursue well-being without looking after the core of our body and how what we eat, what we do, and how we look after ourselves, our mental well-being, like with meditation or walking or swimming or whatever helps. But that bit is important. And finally, last but not least, is compassion as core. Now, in many ways, compassion should be number one, but I've put it at the end because really, if this was a circle of the elements, and I did wonder how to develop them all, but if this was a circle, then compassion would be that whole circle, because without compassion for ourselves and for others, none of this will work. We'll struggle, and we'll struggle to be the best we can be with whoever we're working with, living with long-term conditions. We'll struggle with ourselves if we're not kind and compassionate to ourselves. And I loop round that one all the time. In fact, you know, I'm getting hoisted by my own petard now because of the people I know who've read my book. They'll say, Audrey, are you being kind to yourself? Dutch, you know, having my things quoted back to me, perhaps not. And I do realise that there's so many times that I'm being harder on myself than I very much need to be. So before I'm hard on myself about taking up so much time and looking at the clock, David, I was impressed by your efficient timekeeping earlier. So I'm now just after 1 o'clock. I've romped through who I am, how I got to here, missed out loads, told you about the 10 elements, and maybe I could just tell you about one more thing before we hand on to opening up the discussion. And towards the end of the book, I start to reflect on long COVID, because that's an issue for all the services, in whether it's staff who've had long COVID, it's people, it's friends, family, clients, patients. But this was from an article that was in the BMJ, and it was taken from facilitated groups, where doctors who had COVID and then experienced long COVID met together to discuss the impact on them. And this was like quite early days, 2021 time. So, and here are some of the things they learned from this. And I thought this was fascinating. They learned that they needed to find, as doctors, as says, remember, they needed to find new approaches to healing. They were disappointed medicine didn't offer the answers. They realised the need for self-care and not to pressurise themselves. They were processing the loss of their previous selves. They accepted that the group enabled and helped them, this is the group they'd met in, become more self-compassionate. They better understood what caring means and the values of kindness, compassion for self and others, and feeling heard. They felt changed as people and doctors. They pledged to listen and be more open to symptoms that don't fit with current understanding. And the last one is they developed a much greater understanding of being disabled and living with long-term conditions. Now, I read that after I'd written the 10 elements and developed them, but I thought it was fascinating because, I felt they had been on a similar journey to me, and to many others. And others, of course, have taken on that journey and walked with it. But this was very new to them. Now, I don't know what they've been able to do with that. I suspect for many of them, not much at all. And how will that then affect their values as practitioners? But I just wanted to share that list with you because I think it's of real interest and may resonate for many of you.